Great. Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here. So Maria and I will be talking about clinical decision support tools and how to integrate them. I'm going to go first. And without further ado, I'm Dr. Benjamin Dodsworth. And this is the mother of my co-founder. She had a routine surgery, and she woke up an entirely different person. She saw monsters that were coming out of the walls at her, and she was actually convinced that the staff were trying to kill her. She had developed post-operative delirium, and she's not the only one. Post-operative delirium affects 20% of patients over the age of 60 undergoing surgery, which actually makes that the most common post-surgical complication in that age group. And you do not want to get post-operative delirium. It doubles length of stay, it increases mortality, the likelihood of ending up in a nursing home instead of at home goes up. But actually, the number that scares me the most is how it affects dementia risk. So now that we're also in person, this is quite nice. I can do a little survey. So who thinks delirium increases dementia risk by, let's say, 10%? Okay, no one. That's great. I've primed you well, I think. Who thinks 30%? Let's say 50% or more. Great. You're right. It is 50% or more. And that's a scary number, 50%. But the reality is, if you have a delirium, the likelihood of a new dementia diagnosis in the following 12 months goes up by 1,400%. So you really don't want to get delirium. So now you probably believe me and you say, okay, Ben, as a patient, this does not sound like good news, but it's also really bad news for hospitals. And I have a favorite number for that. Delirium is 60% more expensive to healthcare than diabetes. And these numbers come from the US. So it's also a big problem for hospitals. And I think whenever we talk about AI and clinical decision support tool, we need a good use case. And delirium, for me, is the perfect use case. And the reason I think it's the perfect use case is two. One is it's very multifactorial. There is a lot going on that causes and can cause delirium and influences. And there's actually a really interesting study that was done to look at how are we humans, actually it was on clinicians, arguably the same. And how are we at making decisions based on variables. And we are really good at making decisions with like one variable, two variable, but from variable number 3, our decision-making skills really drop. So perfect use case for delirium. The other, and this is the even more important thing, is that delirium is actually largely preventable. So over 40% of cases can be prevented. But the problem is that that's usually not done. It's very manual tasks, especially by the nurses that don't really have enough time. And therefore, it's very difficult if it's not targeted. So, perfect use case, right? Let's build an AI. It's also the worst use case. And the reason that it's the worst use case is the data. The problem with delirium is that actually most cases are missed or misdiagnosed. The numbers range between 50 and 70% of cases, either missed or misdiagnosed. So we can't really use normal clinical data to build a tool to predict delirium. And this is a huge problem. We still did it, so how did we do that? And the answer is with very strong partners. So we teamed up with McMaster's University and also the Cochrane Institute. In fact, who works for a hospital? Okay. So you probably have heard of the Cochrane. They're extremely well respected. They look at evidence and make recommendations. They don't usually work for or with for-profits like us. So either we are just extremely charming, or we have a good problem to solve. So we teamed up, and basically we managed to convince a bunch of hospitals to work with us. So we had 8 different hospitals that contributed data to actually build the model that we use. And this was data where every single patient after the surgery was assessed multiple times per day for delirium. That was super important to us. And then once we finished the model, we also externally validated it in 6 different hospitals, also different geographies, to make sure it's robust, which is very important when you're building an AI-based tool. And what did we then end up with? So now we have PIPRA. It's an automatic tool. Automatically, when the patient enters the hospital, it pulls out the information it needs from the electronic health record system. It calculates the risk score. And then if a patient is at risk, it allows for very targeted prevention exactly on that patient to then reduce the incidence of delirium. And I mentioned our database. It is the largest and richest in the world on the topic. This is also classed as a medical device. So it's CE marked. It's a class 2A. And it's approved. It's gone through the regulators. FDA is in application. And it's also, everything is published. That was very important to us as well. So you can look in peer-reviewed journals. How did we build it? What are the effects of it? But I think maybe you're sitting there saying, okay, this is a good use case and everything, but what happens if you actually use it? And for that, I have a case study. This was one of the more recent implementations that we did, a relatively small hospital in Switzerland, 335 beds. And we had 2 phases, and what we saw was, first of all, the compliance to screening went up, which is great. But most importantly, the incidence of delirium went down by almost 20%, which is fantastic. But what does that mean? We've reduced the incidence by 20%. That sounds a bit abstract. What it meant for this hospital is we saved over half a day on length of stay. That's over all patients. That's because delirium massively increases length of stay. So a normal patient in that hospital stays around 3 to 4 days. A delirious patient stays 9 days. So we even see that decrease on the bottom line, which is fantastic. And that actually equated to cost savings of over 4 million euros. And this is a relatively small hospital as well. And what I'm also quite excited about is I have some brand new data from last week. And I thought, hey, why not throw it into this presentation? From that same hospital, we now have some data long-term, and actually things have even improved. So we've not only sustained the efforts, but we've even improved them over the long term. This is over a year. And how did we do that? Right? So the first thing we do is we install the tool. And our very first implementation, actually, we thought, delirium is such a huge problem, and the problem is really about prioritization. Surely we install it, and everything will change, and they'll treat the right patients, and it'll be all fantastic. And of course, nothing happened, right? So, and the reason nothing happened, the way I like to explain it is I like to make a little analogy. So, if you imagine someone going to a doctor, right, and this doctor says, you need to do more exercise, or you need to eat more healthily, what is going to happen 9 times out of 10? Nothing at all, right? And the reason nothing happens is, you're not going to see that doctor again. Maybe you'll see him in 6 months or so. Then do they actually really care? This is why you get, a personal trainer, or this is why I, tell my partner, hey, I want to eat more healthily, and then she can, glare at me if I'm biting into a burger. So that is about accountability. So the other thing that we do whenever we do an implementation is we make sure to track how is it going? Are the staff actually doing the right things based on the information that they receive, and giving that feedback loop? And it's incredible what a difference it makes just to have the data, not even saying anything about it, but comparing the different wards. And we gamify it a little bit. So you've got, the ones in red and yellow and green, and you really don't want to be red. It's a bit embarrassing in front of the colleagues. So accountability is key. But the other thing that's also very important is, if you've been cooking a certain way your entire life, maybe you don't know how, you don't know the recipes for healthy cooking and healthy eating. So the other thing we do is we have an e-learning, and that's for both the nurses, but also other clinicians in the hospitals that have touch points. It's now actually accredited in Switzerland. We're based in Switzerland, so maybe soon in Germany as well. But the geriatricians and the nurses now get points when they do our e-learning. So that's kind of the simplistic version. This is what it looks like when we start. It's a 12-week program. It's built into 2 phases so that we can see the difference as well, like the data that I showed you before, with different KPIs that have to be met. And if you don't meet them, then you repeat a week, and it works incredibly well. And it's not my own invention. There's a fantastic team behind it that I also just want to acknowledge. So I have 2 co-founders who are firstly absolutely lovely, but secondly also very competent. So John is our business guy. This is actually his 4th startup. Nayeli is intensivist and anesthesiologist. So she's seen the problem a lot, understands it a lot, had the original idea. And I'm actually the science guy. I'm the science and tech guy. My background is in academia. I did my PhD at Oxford, and then quit my postdoc to join these 2. And I also have another team member, Bea, who will be hosting a little workshop later. Because this was all very quick. We didn't really have time to delve into all the success factors that we've learned along the way. So what we thought is, afterwards in the Q&A session, we'll do a little workshop where we've condensed all the learnings that we have. And if you want to implement your own AI tool, then we've got some actionable steps, and you can go home with something at the end, knowing exactly what to do. And then before I finish, the e-learning that I mentioned is actually for free. So if is anyone interested in giving that a little try? I see some nodding. This is a QR code here, which you can scan, and it's free. You can make an account. We only charge for it for big hospitals that have to understand, who's used it and who hasn't, and who needs a reminder. But for individuals, it's free. And then, just before I close, I had some very interesting conversations in the breaks about also the technical side of integration. And I just wanted to mention that we have different ways of integrating. And from a technical standpoint, it's extremely easy, actually. We have an API. It's HL7 FHIR compliant. We need 9 variables, which are anonymous. You don't need to add, there's no patient identifier that goes with it. It goes to us, calculates the result, goes back. And while that is, from a technical perspective, really easy, it does require the electronic health record providers to, build the API. And I don't know how many of you have worked with those providers. There is sometimes a bit of resistance, and when it does work, there's sometimes a little bit of time that's required. So we have an alternative as well. It's we like to call this a virtual employee, and basically it's based on RPA, robotic process automation. In principle, all that you do is it's like employing a new person. They get an email address and a password, and It's just a bot that sits on-premise in the hospital on a server and actually uses the user interface of the electronic health record to get the data it needs, send it through our API, and then put the results back. And we've actually had some great successes with that as well, especially as interim solutions until things get going with the electronic health record providers. And with that, I am doing extraordinarily well for time, which is great. I'd like to thank you for your attention. If you are interested in a very exciting new project with real impact, and maybe you want to save 4 million euros as well, do speak to us, and we can make sure that our loved ones leave the hospital better than when they arrived. Thanks. So I actually have 4 minutes left even for a couple of questions. I expected to have 3 left, so I'm quite proud of myself. Does anyone have a question before I hand over to Maria?
One question. So you mentioned only about delirium, but do you have other applications to other, other pathologies?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, actually, because that was a key discussion that I had with my co-founders very early on, where we basically were on the crossroads between, do we become a clinical decision support company, or do we become a delirium company? And we decided for the latter because also, when we put in our first product, we realized it's not going to run without, the sundries and everything to enable it. And what I like to say is, in terms of our offering, the clinical decision support is kind of the most tangible, but it's about 20%. It's about culture change. It's about having to really integrating it into the real clinical workflow.
But then the very first slide or the second slide of the mother of your girlfriend, it's post-operative, yeah?
Yes.
And your application is mainly focused on post or pre-operative patients, or is it to any patients or on specific drugs or pre-Alzheimer, pre-dementia, side effects of some drugs who can have delirium? Can you just specify?
Sure. It sounds like I've planted these questions. I promise you they're real. So yeah, this is our first product, which is specifically for post-operative delirium. The time point is before the surgery. And the reason this is our first product is because it uses data from the pre-anesthesia consultation. So there's a specific time point where we have all the data we need, and we can intervene. That said, you can get delirium if you're in hospital for anything else. If you're in ICU, if you have COVID, or you can get delirium as well. And that is what we're working on at the moment. We have several other products in the pipeline focused on delirium. And the medical delirium is one of those. ICU delirium is another. And this morning, we heard a great presentation by AZ Groningen in Belgium. And we're actually working together with those folks to build an ICU algorithm, not because we can't capture those patients, because the medical and the surgical together actually also captures those. But the ICU is a very special environment where we have, it's very data rich. We have longitudinal data that we don't usually have, which makes it a little bit different. So that algorithm is actually a live one that tells you, in next shift, this is the risk, and this is how it's dynamically changing. Yeah.
Any other questions on the floor?
There's one behind you there.
What's your typical intervention?
Yeah, so the question was, what is the typical intervention? And the typical intervention comes usually from the nurses, and that's what we call soft interventions. So it's making sure that the patient is mobilized early, that they're moving during the day so that they sleep at night, making sure the blinds are open when the sunlight, so that they understand it's nighttime, daytime, making sure that the loved ones are there, partners or or kids, that they are regularly reoriented, that you explain to them, you're here for this reason, and also just being a little bit slower and calmer around these patients. So it's really simple stuff, but it's stuff that takes time. And that is already...
I've been said that we have only 5 minutes for the presentation of Maria. So.
Okay.
You do have a full 10 minutes.
Thank you.
So this is for you.
Thank you, Ben. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ben, for this impressive presentation. Thank you for the opportunity showing our work from the University Hospital Frankfurt. Maybe I will show you some work we have done preparing such a score and such an algorithm. Our work is personalized pre-interventional risk stratification of mortality, length of stay, and hospitalization costs in transcatheter aortic valve implantation using a machine learning algorithm, and it was a pilot trial. Today in healthcare environment, it's not only how much data, information, and technology you have at your fingertips, it's what you do with it and how. The background of this study was that the Euroscore 2 is used in some centers, including ours, to assist clinicians in the decision to perform a transcatheter aortic valve implant procedure based on a risk stratification. The Euroscore 2 is a rather generic metric which was not specifically developed and validated by TAVI patients. We investigated then if a TAVI-specific predictive model could achieve improved predictive pre-interventional accuracy of 1-year mortality compared to Euroscore 2. Additionally, the hypothesis we had is that such an optimized model would allow the evaluation of length of stay and the respective hospital treatment costs for TAVI patients, information who are very important for the hospital. And to standardize data acquisition, we implemented a TAVI scorecard. And the TAVI scorecard measures key performance indicators from 4 perspectives: the clinician cardiologist perspective in the quality domain, the cardiology department staff's perspective in the process domain, the patient's perspective in the PROMs and in the outcomes domain, and the perspective of the hospital management in the cost domain. So we have a whole information of the patient journey. The patient and methods in this study was that in this prospective pilot study, almost 300 participants with severe aortic valve stenosis who underwent TAVI were enrolled, and the standard clinical metrics and also patient-reported outcomes, this is very new, were assessed 1 day before TAVI. Using this data, we tested predictive models with 1-year mortality as a dependent variable, and logistic regression with linear and square terms was identified to be the best model for predictability of TAVI outcome. Then the score, we called the score at IDA TAVI score, Intelligent Data-Driven TAVI Decision Score. The results. These here you can see. Oh, yes, here. I wanted to try it. These are the predictors for the score, and ASA and clinical frailty scale. This is a PROM score, are very strong predictor for 1-year mortality, and our logistic regression model score showed significantly better prediction accuracy than the used Euroscore 2, area under the curve 0.659 versus 0.8. Then here we translating our results into a decision tree analysis, and there are 3 categories with cutoffs: for low, intermediate, and high risk patients, and we can predict also the length of hospital stay and the treatment costs. The conclusions and the significance in this present study found that a novel TAVI-specific logistic regression model predicts 1-year mortality better than Euroscore 2. And using this clinically plausible and transparent cutoff values of this novel IDA TAVI score can be used in an everyday practice setting and may provide a simple means of calculation of personalized risk scores of 1 year mortality, length of stay, and hospitalization costs. So we can use this information for the TAVI team members and the patients, and we can make better informed decisions based on a few key metrics. So maybe sometimes all this will be in the theoretical basis, but what we want to do next is to validate this score in a larger patient cohort of the Gary register, and this had been already done. And now we want to develop an app as a decision support instrument, and we are planning a monocentric prospective randomized control study in our heart center comparing medical management decisions in TAVI patients with and without the decision support provided by the model presented, so that we have also using this model and this app and this decision support instrument in our hospital, so that we can build also convenience to use this score for better planning of resources and personnel processes. Our project will start in November and is founded by the Federal Ministry of Education and Research. And this is a prototype that can, we have these risk categories according to the score and predicting 1 year mortality, length of hospital stay, and treatment costs. I know it's not easy to change, but I think we are on the right way. Thank you so much. This is the team. Thank you for the opportunity showing our work here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.